Now let us proceed with our discussions with clause 30 in the PAM contract related to the certificates and payment. In the previous videos, we mentioned about the suspension of the work, which can be due to two reasons. One is that the employer not paying the contractor on time. After the second notice, the contractor may suspend the executions of the work until the payment is made. The second case, it will be when the professionals who are the architects or the consultants withdraw from supervising the project. Without these people, by right the contractor cannot proceed with the work. Therefore, this will be a compulsory suspension of the work. Because of the suspensions of the work, the insurance should stop covering the risks, and the contractor shall protect the work. The costs incurred related to the protections of the work shall be added to the contract sum. The reason being here is, both case of suspensions of the work here is not due to the responsibility of the contractor. Therefore, the contractor is entitled to claim for the cost for the protections of the work. Now let us proceed with the discussions on the final account. The final account here, it will be the last documented account stating the amount due to the contractor. This by right should conclude the entire project, and this shall be done properly in order to prevent dispute. The final figure in the final account shall be made transparent to both sides. If any of the parties disagree with the number, the relevant party will need to raise it up, provide justifications for reconsiderations. Then there will be a final version of the final account, and to see both sides whether they agree with that final figure. If they still cannot come to a common understanding, this may require involvement of the third party, such as the mediator or the adjudicator. Now let us look into the details one by one. Within 6 months after the practical completions of the work, the contractor should send to the architect and the quantity surveyor all the documents necessary for the prepare of the final account, including those related to the nominated subcontractor and nominated supplier. You know that at the practical completions, all the works has already been completed. There could be minor defects that require rectifications, but those are all minor things which can easily be completed. Since now the entire project has already practically completed, it is time to conclude the project. The architect and quantity surveyor will need to finalize the final account, especially when come to the monetary figures. These are sensitive to both parties, both the employer and the contractor. Now it is always a good practice that the contractor to provide sufficient information so that the final account can be completed smoothly without ambiguities. From the contractor point of view, contractor would like to acquire whichever that his has already been completed and acquire whichever he is entitled to. Therefore, that would be good that if the contractor provide all the necessary informations so that the architect and the quantity surveyor would not miss any of those. This shall smoothen the process for the architect and quantity surveyor to finalize the figures in the final account. Now the document here should contain all the latest construction drawings and details, properly bind together, the details of all the quantities, rate and prices, and also any adjustments of the contract sum and the additional payment or compensations claimed by the contractor under the contract, together with any explanations and supporting brochures, documents and calculations. You know that in the construction project, there could be several versions of the construction drawings. Some changes may be made during the construction process. Regardless how many versions are there, the final version shall apply. This version should be ultimately what is actually being constructed. Whichever that has already been superseded or outdated shall not be taken into considerations in compiling this final account. The details of all the quantities, rate and price are also to be provided, especially on the quantity part, which could be slightly different than what was initially tendered, subjected to the conditions in the site. And there could be some adjustments to the contract sum during the construction project. All those shall be supported with proper explanation, justifications, and also calculations. All these are to be submitted to the architect and quantity surveyor to be evaluated, considered, and adopted in the final account. And then the architect and quantity surveyor should complete the final account within 6 months from the receipt of all the documents from the contractor. Once this final account is completed, they will need to send a copy to the employer and also the contractor. This is to make transparent to both the employers and the contractor, informing the employer the amount to be paid to the contractor, and also make known to the contractor that amount that entitled to the contractor. Now, in the case of the delayed submissions of the documents by the contractor, the period of completing the final account may be adjusted. A rough calculations in terms of the durations. After the practical completions of the work, within 6 months, the contractor will need to submit the documents to the architect and quantity surveyor. Now, receiving this document, the final account should be completed within another 6 months. In total, a maximum durations of 1 year. This is exactly the same durations for the defect liability period, which is 12 months. The timing is just nice, that the final account is concluded by the end of the defect liability period. Now, in the case that the contractor failed to submit the documents for considerations in the final account, the architect and QS shall complete the final account based on the information available. Now, completing this final account is without the input from the contractor. That means in the case that the architect and quantity surveyor miss any item which is supposedly entitled to the contractor, the favor might go to the employer. This is because in the first place, the document is not submitted to the architect and quantity surveyor. It is possible for them to miss some of the important item, because even though they do not submit, they do not give the sufficient information to the architect and quantity surveyor, they will still need to come up with the final account to be as just as possible. Since the contractor do not submit the document, the architect and quantity surveyor still need to complete the final account. The maximum durations shall be given in the appendix. Based on what is stated here, it is typically 15 months from the date of practical completions. Now if you calculate the duration here, there is an extra 3 months as compared to the durations given for the quantity surveyor and architect to conclude the final account with the information given by the contractor that require 12 months here. But if without the information given by the contractor, 15 months shall apply. This extra 3 months is reasonable as the architect and quantity surveyor may require longer time to work out all the details in concluding the final account. You know that the entire communications throughout the project, as stipulated in the PAM contract, everything should be in written. Therefore, it is possible for the architect and the quantity surveyor to trace all the record in concluding the final figures in the final account. This is still achievable. Only that with the assistance of the contractor, the entire process can be sped up, and the architect and quantity surveyor can cross-check their final account with the information as given by the contractor. So, the bottom line here is the final account will need to be produced by the architect and the quantity surveyor with or without the input from the contractor. If they have the input from the contractor, a total duration of 12 months is applied. But if the contractor do not provide sufficient information, 15 months shall be applied. Now that the final account has been completed, both the employers and the contractors have a version of it. We will need to see their response, whether there is any dispute by any of the party. The meaning of dispute here is any of the party disagree with the final figure. In the case that there is no dispute, that means both parties agree with the final account. No party raise any concern. Within 3 months from the dates of the receipt of the final account, the final account is considered conclusive, and it is deemed that agreed by both parties. With that, the employer shall proceed with the payment, and the contractor shall be entitled with the figures as stated in the final account. Now, in the case that there is a dispute, either by the contractors or by the employer, within 3 months of the dates of the receipt of the final account, the party disputing will have to write a notice plus the relevant particulars to another party raising a dispute. This written notice will need to send a copy to the architect and quantity surveyor. This is to make known to the architect and quantity surveyor regarding the raise of the dispute, since they are the person producing the final account. So this disputing party may not necessarily be the contractor. If the employer is disagreeing with the final figure, the employer can also dispute the final account. Now this has been made known to the architect, quantity surveyor and another party. Everyone in the loop know about it. Then within 3 months from the ground of the dispute, that means within 3 months of this written notice, architect and quantity surveyor shall review the final account again. Now there is particular submitting by the disputing parties. The architect and quantity surveyor will look into the particulars and to determine whether it is necessary to amend the final account. The final account now can either be amended or not amended. This will have to subjected to the justifications given by the disputing party for the entitlement. Once this final account, which is the final version, after the initial versions is confirmed, the latest versions of the final account shall be given to the contractors and the employer. We will need to see their response if there is any further dispute. If both parties cannot come to a common understanding, that means there is further disagreement in terms of the final account. This may trigger the mediations. That means there will be involvement of the third parties, and this shall be brought to the mediations within 3 months of the decisions of the final account. If both sides still do not agree with the latest versions of the final account, and they do not brought forward for the mediations, even though still with the disagreement, the final account is deemed conclusive and agreed by both parties. That means there is one party is not happy with the final account, but decided not to brought forward to the mediations. We shall discuss on these mediations in future. Now, in the case that there is any dispute on liquidated damage, set-off and the interest, this will have to refer to the arbitrations. The arbitrations also involve the third party in order to reach to a common understanding and decide the final figures to be entitled to who and paid to who. There is slight difference between the mediations and arbitrations. We shall also discuss about this in future. Now, regarding the items in the final account, there will be information regarding the adjustment made to the contract sum, the amount to which the architect considered that the contractor is entitled of. This one will based on the information from the contract, and there shall be omissions or substitutions in terms of the prime cost sum, the related profit provided by the contractors in the contract, the amount payable by the employer to the nominated subcontractor and nominated supplier. Of course, this amount payable is together with the prorated amount for the profit. There shall be some portions of the profit to the contractor, since this final account is between the employer and the contractor, and also the adjustments of the provisional sum. These are the items to be included in the final account. As for the item not to be included in the final account, those are the matters that to be resolved separately between the employer and the contractor. Among those include the liquidated damage imposed by the employer under clause 22.1. You know that the liquidated damage is related to the penalty imposed by the employer due to the delay of the work or delay of the completions by the contractor, and the relevant rates are normally stated in the appendix by the cost per unit of days. Second, it will be the set off by the employer under clause 30.4. The employer is entitled to set off the cost under these circumstances. These are the circumstances in that the contractor fails to fulfill his obligations, which as a result, there are loss and expenses suffered by the employer, and since it is the responsibility of the contractor, the cost shall be incurred to the contractor. So, the employer should be able to salvage the relevant costs by setting off the cost supposedly paid to the contractor. Next, it will be the interest paid by either of the party to another party under clause 30.17. Clause 30.17 is related to the interest, which we shall discuss in the following videos.